Hello, everyone. I'm Farokh Shahabi, the co-founder and CEO of Formaloo. I'm so happy to be on this event and talk to you about the no-code industry, what it means to the database industry, and what will happen in the future of work. So let's go a little back. Let's talk about the no-code industry and what is happening and what it really means for businesses. Let's take an example. If my mom decides to create an online shop for her pastries today, she can. She can have a beautiful online store with all of her products and their images up and running. She can even connect it to her bank account in less than 1 hour. She doesn't even need a computer. She can do it all on her phone. If you had watched this 20 years ago, you would have laughed. Today, anyone with no knowledge of software development or IT for that matter can create beautiful websites, big e-commerce marketplaces, or even mobile applications with just a few clicks. Thanks to no-code platforms like WordPress, Shopify, Webflow, Bubble, and a lot more. As Albert Einstein said, you don't really understand something unless you can explain it to your grandmother. And that's what is happening in the software industry as well. You can summarize the evolution of the software industry in one word: easier. All the successful products that you use every day are just the easier versions of the products that you used yesterday. Collaborating online on a Google document is so much easier than sending and receiving Word documents back and forth with your team. Installing Zoom is so much easier than having to set up a complex Cisco VoIP system for all of your team members. Searching a desired YouTube clip, it's so much easier to having to sit and watch TV at a specific time only. And of course, scrolling down on TikTok, it's so much easier than watching YouTube videos. Every day it's happening, and every product that we think is simple enough are become much, much easier and with better user experience. An easier product will always replace a more complex product as the primary solution for the majority of its users. Everything, and I mean everything we create so far, everything we invent, is a transformation of something else that we either created or found in the world before. Creation or invention is not create something from zero, is it to create something that is much, much better than existing solutions. Much faster, much easier, better user experience. Otherwise, it's just an improvement. Even if you look at the software development itself, almost all of the advancements of the past 30 years can be described like this. We made development much, much easier, and now we can build more powerful products and scale much, much faster in less amount of time. The no-code industry has grown 10 times in the past 5 years alone. Also, the rise of COVID-19 and remote working accelerated this growth tremendously. And I want to talk about data now. Data is without a doubt the core of every software. It's the man behind every software. So what about the database industry? How did databases evolve in the world of no-code developers, citizen developers, and business users? Unfortunately, the thing that should have happened never did. The majority of businesses choose these two options. One, they use spreadsheets as their database, which is a huge step backward. Two, they use software builder platforms to automatically create a database for them, which means, for example, the database design of a CRM for a big factory is as same as a CRM for a restaurant. These options are far from ideal, but they were easy enough for almost all businesses to consider them and use them as the primary option. Let's talk about the spreadsheets a little bit. Spreadsheets are not databases. We all know that. But almost every business collaborates and organizes at least a portion of its data in various spreadsheets. Is that really wrong? Yeah. And here's why. Spreadsheets don't have real access management or security control. Same as all file-based design systems, spreadsheets are huge security risks. If someone had access to a spreadsheet once, nothing can stop them from duplicating it and keeping it forever, which is a huge no-no in the cybersecurity era. Spreadsheets don't even have dynamic and limited level access management options that databases can provide nowadays. And they lack even the basic security protocols. And all of that is okay because they were not designed to be databases in the first place, but as worksheets. We were meant to work on our data in spreadsheets, but never store data in them. The second thing that I want to talk about is the danger of copying and paste. The ability that we have now to freely copy and paste what we want in a spreadsheet is really great, super easy. But that also means that we will lose the origin of data, which is very important in our game. And we also most probably end up with multiple copies and duplication, which is neither efficient nor safe. When you lose the origin of and goal of each data point, it becomes so much harder to connect them and understand them. So it quickly can become a big pile of meaningless entries. And this is what is happening all over the world. And when you have no database design, you cannot scale. Spreadsheets may work for small use cases, but never for serious scalable work. The cost of maintenance of a tool created with spreadsheets can become too much as you scale. Arguably, creating relations in a spreadsheet is so much harder than designing a full database in the first place, and also far, far riskier. It's like filling your bath with a cup. It might get done, but the water will be too cold by the time you can use it. So what is the solution? The solution is like this. You should make databases without them even noticing them. The businesses should create their own customized database without even realizing what they are doing. Here's how. The first thing is the fact. Creating a database is too hard and too boring for most people. On the other hand, people love creating and customizing what they can see and feel, the tools they need. If it's easy enough to create and customize it, in any game that you can imagine your children are playing, they love customizing, they love building things, but they don't realize that they are in some way developing a piece of software. That's what we should show people, not boring data tables, not coding, but the end results, what they can be and how they can be used. And that's the magic of the Formaloo Data OS. So by helping businesses and business users design and create their own customized tools that they actually can see and feel, we actually are designing and building a full database automatically for them. Creating a database this way can be super easy. You don't even think about it. Same as when you play with Legos. You just need to put the building blocks together and voila, you will have exactly what you want. A database is just an structure. It's useless if it cannot be used easily. So the key is not to only create a database, because that doesn't work, because people cannot see it, cannot feel it, but to create customized tools on top of it as well. We can break the journey of data into 3 main steps in many businesses: data collection, data organization, and utilization of data. One of the biggest problems that companies nowadays have and are facing is that every business is unique, and they need their own unique tools to operate and to be more efficient. Also, they need to collaborate now more than ever, especially when we are talking about the rise of remote work, when people are not in the same building or in the same countries or even continents. Collaboration is the key. And when you are talking about collaboration, the first thing that you collaborate on is data. The world today needs more software than developers could ever possibly build. So software development by developers is not an answer. The answer is that everyone should become a developer. But development should be easy. When you create a Formaloo, which is happening in the Formaloo platform, a database, a business logic, and a full UI connected to it are created for you automatically, which looks like this under the hood. Let me share my screen. Yeah. This can explain the majority of the softwares that every developers are creating. This is actually a very, very famous architecture. Every software that you are using and you will use in future are somehow using this architecture. This architecture can be different in some ways. The controller can be separated in 2 or 3 steps. The view and the model can be together, but overall, it's the same principle over and over. You have an input, a data input, you are processing it, and you are showing an output. And that explains every piece of software. And that explains how databases and how data works with software. So when you create a Formaloo, a database is created automatically for you. Brain is created on top of it. So you can work with that database and create applications. And so you don't want to bore people with all of this stuff. A view is created as well. So people can work on it. They can collaborate. They can show it to their audience. They can show it to their customers. They can use it themselves. So a data model, a controller, and a view is created automatically. And when you imply that all of these relations, all of these complex things are done automatically with just one click, it makes software development much, much easier. But that's not the end result. If you want to create a website, for example, you are not starting from scratch. It's still too hard. So the main thing is that don't start from zero. When you want to create a database, you should not start from zero. It's not about, okay, let's think about what I should design and everything. When you have something like this, you should have a very customizable environment so you can design as you go on. And the best thing to start is by work of others. You are not alone in the world. Everyone else is designing databases as well for different use cases. Their use cases are different from yours, but somehow similar, like 80%, 90%, 99% similar. Great. So you can start from work of others. You can start from templates, from samples, to not start from ground zero and just think about it, to see use cases, study them, and create something better. Let me show you an example. Here are templates that Formaloo provide. We have, I think, 200, 300 templates now, from the easy templates that everyone can see from with different UIs and with different systems, to complex applications that everyone needs for their work, all in one place. And when someone, let me move that. And when someone is navigating these templates and seeing them, and they can just duplicate it and use it as their own with a button, they can see how it works on different responses, on different devices, and they can see how it feels on different solutions, and what I can have, what should be happening. I can see my final solution in the mod. So I can customize it. I can make it my own. So I can create something more powerful than I could ever done before. And that's the beauty. The beauty is not to box people in some templates or some procedures or some approaches. It's just to give them Legos so they can create anything they want themselves. They can create mobile applications. They can create web applications. They can create forms. They can create widgets, anything they need for their business. They can create customer portals. They can create their own login, sign-up situation, Kanban views, map views, anything they can, just by clicking a few buttons. So customization is a large key here. Customization means that you are giving people the ability to create their own things without your own box. So people are creating their own boxes. But with that, you make it super easy. You give them a brain, an automatic brain, with logic, with the calculations, with every feature they need. You give them ability to integrate your database to the tools they are using. Now is not the time that businesses use only one tool. They are using multiple. They are using a few dozen tools at the same time. And integration of the data is the key here. So you should be able to create a database that automatically create to any data source that you want, send data to them, receive data from them, and navigate it, analyze it, all in the same place. And it should not be that hard that you require a developer or data scientist. That's the beauty of the no-code platforms, such as Formaloo. So you can give people the ability, the tools to create their own tools. In a few years, it's most likely that people are not using Office applications anymore, because nowadays they can create their own Office applications. Just as like that, they are creating their own websites today, their own marketplaces today, their own shops today. Everything will be customizable if you create not a box, but the tools to create a box. Thank you very much. I'm Farokh Shahabi again, the co-founder and CEO of Formaloo, and I love to hear more about you and your business. Have a great day.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Haas Talks Voss. I'm the Haas, head of open source strategy here at Percona Database, and today I am here with Ovice Tariq. Hello, Ovice. Welcome back to the Haas Talks Voss.
I'm doing great. Thank you, Matt, for having me here. The last time I was here, we had a wonderful conversation about databases and how we managing data at Uber, and glad to be back here and really miss you at the conference. Was looking forward to meeting you in person.
Yes, I know, right? So for those who don't know, I got COVID like the very week before the conference, so I couldn't travel. So it was horrible because you spend all of this time and energy and you want to meet all of your friends and all the people you know in the community, and then it's like I'm stuck watching on Twitter. It's very sad and depressing. So now I need to go out and do more conferences to make up for it. That's my goal
definitely.
now.
You definitely have to do that. But look, I can tell you that the conference was success. For me personally, it was great to be back in the community in person, meeting people, and the schedule, the speakers, everything was great. I got to learn a lot of new things. So it was great to be there.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear it. Because the only one that you could blame for that would be me on the schedule. So I'm happy that the schedule is okay. It's good. Yeah, good speakers, good lineup. That's good. I like that. I like the feedback.
So you were there in spirit then.
Now, Vice, I was. I did you see that I photoshopped myself into photos? Yes, there's some videos floating around that I just ended up in mischievous places. So I'm just going to say they're quite great if you go look at Twitter for those. Always fun. But Vice, you mentioned the last time we talked, you were at Uber, and now you're not. You have your own company now, and your company is called Tigris Data. What is Tigris all about? Tell us about what your aim is with Tigris.
Would love to do that. So Tigris, is still connected with my history with databases, and based on my experience over the last 15 years, working at Uber, working at Percona and other companies. So it's about building user-friendly database that makes it fundamentally easier to consume and use databases for real-time applications. And the idea is to move away from an unbundled approach that the industry is going towards more of a bundled approach, where the developer doesn't have to think about taking up multiple database systems, putting them, stitching them together, and managing things like data pipelines and data movement across different systems. So simplifying all of that and really providing what I think is the right serverless experience for databases.
So it's really, you mentioned different databases. So under the hoods, is it handling where data goes to which sort of database, which type of database, and it's routing things? Is that the gist of it?
If we think about data access patterns in general and what applications typically end up using, there are a couple of things that come up to be common. One is the OLTP system, and there you could be using a SQL database or a document database, and then you need real-time search because you want the users of your application to be able to do keyword searches, fuzzy searches, and be able to personalize their experience that way. And then because microservice architecture is so common these days, and that's the way to build scalable applications, event-driven development has become very important, which essentially means that streaming is very important. That's the way that different services communicate. So these are the three distinct data access patterns that I think are very important for every application. And what we are trying to do is cover these three data access patterns, but not by saying that there's a single storage engine that's able to serve all of that, because that would simply not be possible. But instead have a single platform that supports these type of data access patterns, while abstracting away the different storage engines that are used to make it happen.
So it's like one engine to rule them all, and then behind the scenes you can pick like the proper things without the end user having to understand the underlying
so one platform to rule them all in the context of real-time applications. So the user is interfacing with simple, easy to use APIs, And those APIs are backed by a smart query engine, which knows which storage engine under the hood to route the traffic to. And then the platform showing that those data structures, those distinct storage engines are consistent and in sync.
Now, you mentioned easy, right? Like, so I'm curious, right? Like, so APIs, that's good for developers, but for DBAs, it's like APIs, isn't that what SQL is? It's just that's the API to the database. So why are you focused on easy in the developer experience? Like, what brought you to focus there?
Yes. Easy. Databases traditionally have been difficult or hard from a usability perspective for developers, especially when I'm writing an application.
Really?
Well, it depends on who you talk to, right? I mean, if you're talking to DBAs, and if I wear my DBA hat, then no, databases already provide all that you need, right? You just don't know how to use it.
Yeah.
But if I put on my application developer hat, then it's oftentimes a little hard to reason about data modeling. Oftentimes it's a little hard to map between how I'm building my application, which tends to be more object focused, and then mapping it back to SQL, I think tends to be a little harder. That's why we see things like ORM being used, right? Which is essentially providing a way for the developer to be consistent with how they are writing the application code and accessing the database in the same way. So that's what I mean by ease of use and simple APIs, that our focus is for the developer to not have to think outside the code, right? So as you're writing your application code, you use the application code to define your data model, and then you use your favorite programming language and the favorite programming language construct to access the database. You don't have to think about a separate language and a different way of you don't have to think about a separate language, or you don't have to think about a different approach to storing and accessing the data. So that's essentially the approach that we are taking, which means that if, for example, you're using Go, you would define your data model using the Go constructs, right? And then you will have APIs that are similar to any other function call that you would have, which you would use to store and access the data in the database.
And then behind the scenes, you're doing all of the scaling, the operational stuff, just handling it all on your
yes. Scaling it, keeping it efficient, making sure it's reliable, handling all of that. Yep. Backups, all of the operational stuff, right? Yeah, all of the operational stuff. So the idea is to keep the infrastructure abstracted as much as possible, while providing the right level of observability. So not having it as a black box, but still making sure that all the operational concerns are taken care of.
Yeah, and I mean, we joke a little bit about like, developers, like not thinking that databases are horrible and hard to use, but they do. They think that databases are horrible and hard to use. Like, I mean, I kid, but I always tell people, developers hate databases. Most of them hate them. Like it's a necessary evil, and they want to avoid it if they can. They do it because they have to store data, but they don't want to. That's why, I think that we're seeing kind of a renaissance on technologies that help developers feel more comfortable interacting with their database layer, right? So, having the ability to have the security, the, availability, everything baked in, that's great. But then also giving them an interface where it's just natural to whatever programming language or, APIs are used to. It just makes sense.
Yes, and that is essentially the route that we are taking as well. You put it really beautifully that, as much as we as database engineers don't like the fact that application developers don't always love the database, that's simply true, right? And that's why I think it's important to take a cue from the application framework side. There's been a lot of interesting stuff that has happened on the application framework side, like lambdas, and making it more higher level, so that developers are thinking more about business logic and not having to configure and run web servers. I think we need to take a similar approach on the database side or data side in general, and start from the developer experience. That what is the day-to-day tooling that developers using? They are using some programming language, right? And how do I make this seamless for them, not have them learn something new?
Now you're doing this as an open source project, as well as eventually commercial. So what are you looking for? Code contributions? You're looking for help in that space? Like what are you looking for from a community perspective that our listeners, our audience, how do they get involved, right? And what sort of help could you use?
Yes. So we are building it as an open source project. I myself am a big open source proponent, and my career has been dependent on MySQL for the most part, and other open source technologies. And we are building this. We are building Tigris as an open source solution, and there are multiple reasons for doing that. One of the reasons is, from a transparency perspective, especially when you're building a data and database product, it's important to make sure that it's clear that it's clear to the users in terms of how we're building the database, and because that's what's going to store the data, right? So transparency is really important there. Then the other aspect of open source is what you touched about, the community aspect, right? And I think that community is really important when you're thinking about building a developer-friendly product. How do you build a developer-friendly product, right? By basing the roadmap of the product on feedback of the developers, by doing things that the developers or the users of the product really think that this is making their life easy. And I think that's where community comes into the play. And I'm really focused on making sure that our product roadmap is essentially driven through community, right? So that's one core part of it. The other part of it is contributions, which is again the power of open source, which is all of these smart people around the world getting contributions from them would make the product a lot more robust, right? And that would also make
obviously power of the crowd.
Yeah, and that's essentially the important reasons why we are going with open source, to have the community support so that we are making the right product, while also have the community support to actually build out the product in the right way.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I mean, and that's great, right? I mean, I think that, having the ability to tap into the community and to work with the community, it drives a lot better code. It also drives good feedback. It helps you with your product roadmap. I mean, it is kind of the de facto standard. Now, what's interesting is in the open source space, and I'm not familiar with your plans in the future, but we're seeing a lot more people adopt open source as a means to tap into the community, but then their end product ends up being the as a service model. So, a cloud-based solution that, hey, this is where we make our money. Sure, you can go grab the code, do whatever, but we have the behind the scenes cloud as the deployment method, if you will. And we're seeing that more and more with a lot of big companies, whether it's in the MySQL space or, the Postgres space, and Mongo space, whatever, where it's almost like cloud first, with open source being more of that kind of marketing type of thing to get the interest and galvanize. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, is that a trend that you've seen as well?
Yeah, I definitely see the trend. I definitely see that more and more happening. Definitely see that a trend. And the way I think about it is, I think that is essentially using the community to for your own gains, but not actually giving back to the community, right? So it's especially if you have built out a open source product, and there are different variations of how these companies are building out the business. For example, the deployment code is not open source, right? So yes, the code is there, but how do you actually run it in production? That is not open source, right? So is the product really open source then? Then the second part we see is other types of licenses, which essentially, mean that the product becomes open source when it has actually grown old, right? Like, okay, this will become open source after 3 years. Well, after 2-3 years, there are going to be so much security holes, so many bug fixes. Who is going to actually use your open source product? So I definitely agree that I see this more and more as a marketing ploy, and not really contributing to giving back to the community and making the community more empowered, which is why the approach that we are taking is that everything is going to be open source. We are doing the development in open source, and that also includes the deployment mechanism. That the deployment pieces, for example, we'll be using Kubernetes to make it to be able to run the system, and everything around that is going to be open source. And we would eventually end up having a hosted version of the product, but the hosted version would be no different than what is open. So it would just be, think of it as an installation of the product that is available open source. This is not to say that the hosted version is not needed. Hosted version is still needed because not everyone would be able to host it. But I think that when you're utilizing the community to grow your product and take it forward, in order to give back to the community, you need to make sure that you actually make the open source part usable. You provide it in a way where people can actually use it and run it if they want to.
So, it's an interesting thought. So I was, KubeCon was also this week, and being at home, stuck with COVID, I was, like I said, I watched basically Percona Live through Twitter, which meant I picked up on all the KubeCon things as well. And there was an interesting thread that I started to see throughout some of the conversations at KubeCon, which was, there are the most popular topics are the user topics, not the contribution or the deep kind of open source topics. And that really got me thinking, and we've done some surveys here at Percona about this as well. I think the generation of developers and users isn't necessarily as tied to open source as a must as much as it is a checkbox. And they really more care about the button, right? Oh, look, I'm just going to click the button and you say it's open source. So I'm just going to trust that it is, but I don't really understand underneath the hood or really care. And I'm not going to contribute. I'm just going to use. And I think that that's a really weird trend, and I don't know what to make of it yet. But getting to kind of the different model here, and contributing back to the community. I wonder if we've kind of tricked people into open source is a term, and it's just another one of those scalable, it's web scale, right? Is it turning into something like that now, where we all love an open source who've been in the community for a while, but for a lot of folks, do they understand and do they care anymore? That's a tough question.
That's a tough question. I think that on our part we need to do more education so people understand what truly open source mean. But I think that the other part to it is essentially the impact of the cloud, right? Because more and more people are now used to clicking the button in the cloud, just having the solution available to them, right? And not having to run it themselves. And that is a completely fine expectation, because most of the products don't tend to be infrastructure specific products, right? And giving the user the ability to not have to worry about infrastructure is important. That's how you enable people, enable a lot of these developers to move forward with their businesses and their products. So that is definitely one reason why it is this way. I do think that people care a lot about open source, and especially over the last few years, we are seeing more and more trend open source being something really important. And when, as part of building our product, and we have talked to a lot of users of databases, right? And one thing that has always come up is the open source part, that they would very much prefer to have something that's open source. And in some cases, if it's not open source, they wouldn't even consider it, right? Because like one of the things that you were mentioning, that open source, there's definitely the transparency aspect and community aspect of open source, but the other aspect of open source is quality. Having a product open source ensures that the product has longevity, the product has more quality, and that is something that people see when they use an open source product.
Well, with this push button kind of environment that we're in now, where it's all about how do we just make developers forget about the infrastructure, right? What are the pain points that developers are facing in the data space now? Like, what are you seeing like as the critical issues that keep on popping up? I've got a few that I've seen over and over again, but I'm curious, what are you seeing in the space in terms of, hey, now that we've solved or we've got solutions for high availability or for, uptime or, like scaling, a bit, what sort of pain points do developers care about?
Yeah,
and what
so
resonates with them now?
from a usability perspective and developer experience perspective, I think the biggest pain point for developers is actually related to the unbundled architecture approach, or unbundled product delivery approach that the industry has taken, where instead of the developer having a end-to-end solution, we provide the developer with Lego blocks, a lot of options, and then we expect them to pick the right option and connect the right Lego blocks and connect them in the right way while learning each of these Lego boxes individually, while operating, managing, observing these individually. And that is the biggest pain point that I see, that from an architectural perspective, the Lego-based approach or unbundled approach, if I'm building a platform myself, like the way I'm like Tigris, that makes sense because that's the way to build a scalable architecture. But when I'm building it from a user perspective, the user should not have to worry about many Lego blocks and how do I stitch them together and how do I stitch them in the right way. And I think that is the biggest impediment that I see, based on my research, developers are seeing these days, that they would very much want to have a end-to-end solution that works for them out of the box.
Yeah. And a lot of times the database side of things is a secondary thing, right? So there are solutions for, a lot of deployment methodologies and, methods for the application side, the tools in the application. But from the database perspective, it lags behind a couple of years. So it's a magnitude more difficult to handle a lot of those issues.
For sure. And that is exactly where I think that we are trying to innovate, that how can we push the database industry forward and, start thinking about it more from a user perspective and not necessarily from our perspective as database developers.
So, pushing the database, space forward, there's quite a big ecosystem out there. There's a lot of database companies. Where do you think is the next big thing in the database space? Like, where do you see like the space evolving here? Right now, we started to see some NewSQL type applications and databases start to pop up. We're starting to see the emphasis on the developer. What's the next big thing? I think we will
see more and more emphasis on developers. For sure. And we will see the industry go back in circle. Remember back in the Oracle days where Oracle was able to handle, there's different type of use cases. We will see more, and that's what I refer to as a bundled approach. So we'll see the cycle go back there where you'll see more and more of these, unified solutions or that work out of the box. So I think that the industry is going over there. And then the other thing that is important is I think that there's going to be a blurring of line between purely a database versus a backend that can also run some business logic, which you have been in the database industry would remind you of stored procedures and stored functions, right? So I think that we will see more blurring of lines between application frameworks and database, and we'll be moving more towards a backend approach where as applications are moving more towards a Lambda style architecture, we would see more and more business logic getting pushed down to the database, and we'd be seeing a push more towards a unified solution. That's more on the delivery aspect of thing. And I think that there's other aspect of it as well, due to, increased focus on data privacy and regulations. The other important aspect we will see is distribute databases being distributed instead of the centralized approach that we saw emerge over the last decade. We'll see more of a decentralized approach and pushing of the data close to the user, doing the processing close to the user instead of bringing everything in a central place.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting point that you made that, that there's this technology cyclical, wheel that goes on. And I think most people don't realize that like a lot of technology that we use today was really invented like 3 iterations ago or 4 iterations ago, and we just rediscovered it and repackaged it. And a lot of the ideas that we come up with for new things, they've existed before. It's just we're rediscovering. It's an interesting space, and you can learn a lot from how people have done it in the past. And I constantly see the pendulum swing one way, and then people go like, "Oh my God, we're so distributed, we're crazy, we've got all these things. Now let's go back and consolidate." And then we get too consolidated, and it's like, "Why are we spending all this money on these monolithic big things? Let's go back and go, and distribute again." And so you get this back and forth, and I think you're going to continue to see that happen because in the tech space, it's just a wheel. You got to wait long enough, and eventually it'll come back around into popularity.
You see the circles, and in the tech space in general, even if you look at the programming languages, moving from dynamically typed languages to statically typed languages. So there's definitely this is definitely something that we see. But I think that whenever a new iteration happens, when we go back in the cycle, we do come back in a better way because technology has generally moved forward.
Yeah.
So when we come back, we come with a more efficient solution, a solution that will take us forward further.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I definitely see that. It's something that is an interesting thing to see. But yeah, so Ovice, I like to play. You didn't get this opportunity to play this game with me last time that you were here, which I like to now. I've started this thing of just asking a lot of rapid fire questions, just so people can get to know my guests. It's actually a pretty interesting, fun way to just hear about you and learn a little bit about Ovice. And, so these are 100% random questions off of the top of my head, and I do not know what I'm going to ask. Okay, so I'm just forewarning you. Are you ready?
Well, yes.
Are you ready?
But let's say yes.
Okay. Growing up as a child, what was your favorite food?
My favorite food was barbecue. Yeah.
Barbecue. Okay. And now what is your favorite food? If we're going to take you out to dinner, what kind of restaurant or place are we going to take you?
Barbecue. I haven't changed much.
Oh, yeah. So you haven't changed much at all. Okay. That's okay. What's your favorite vacation destination?
That's an interesting one. There are a lot of places in California, so we keep visiting it. But I haven't been to Mediterranean, but that seems to be the place that I would want to go to, and probably would be my favorite destination.
Okay, all right, fair enough. What was
the
last
book that I read? Amp It Up is the book that I read last. It's by the Snowflake CEO.
Okay.
I definitely recommend people reading it. It talks a lot about execution and delivery, and essentially execution delivery is what separates a successful company from one that's not successful. So I highly recommend reading it.
Okay, fair enough. What about your favorite movie?
My favorite movie is the Dark Knight series, Batman: The Dark Knight series. Not this one, the one with Christian Bale. That's my favorite.
Okay. So is it because of the Joker and Heath Ledger, or was it just it was the whole series?
Heath Ledger for sure.
Okay.
Phenomenal, acting, but in general, I just really liked how emotional it was, and it really gets me emotional whenever I watch it.
Okay. Well, yeah. Maybe you could be the Dark Knight of the database space, right? So you can, you can fight for data justice. That'd be cool. I don't know. We could create a comic book character. Somebody out there create Ovice into a comic book character for us. We would appreciate it. So, out of all the database releases that you have been part of and all the different databases, what has been your favorite database release?
My favorite database release. So of course MySQL 8, I think, was a leap forward. So I think that was a big step forward. MyRocks, bringing in RocksDB to the MySQL space, and but I think that the one that I liked the most was the work that we did at Uber, building Uber's distributed document database, and taking that into production and building out a scalable system. That was one of my best experiences, I would say.
And finally, we'll end with this one. What is the absolute dumbest piece of code you've ever seen moved into production? Like you scratch your head. Maybe you had to fix it. Maybe you're working at Percona and somebody got called in the middle of the night to fix something. Maybe it was somewhere else you worked. What's something that's so even today, you're like, what? How did they do that? That's just awful.
Yes. Well, I am a perfectionist, so there are so many examples that I can think of where it was just so hard for me to understand how this got into production, and I ended up rewriting it. So yeah, hard to come up with a single example, but yeah, I definitely say that lots of such cases. And in fact, when I look at my code a year later, I see the same thing, that how the hell did this go into production?
Okay, fair enough. All right. Vice, thank you for coming out. For those who are interested in Tigris data, you can go to, is it tigrisdata.com?
It's tigrisdata.com or tigris.dev if you want a shorter one. And Tigris as in TIGRIS.
Okay, and I would encourage you to follow Vice and the team on LinkedIn and Twitter and all of the socials. And thank you for hanging out with us today, telling us a little bit about Tigris and talking to us about the open source community.
It's been a pleasure coming here again, and thank you so much for setting up this podcast. I've been following it, and it's a great learning experience. So I'm super happy to be here, and looking forward to being here yet again.
Oh, great. Yes, and Vice, I think you might have seen. I ended up being number one in the open source database market podcast in Tunisia. So it's growing in popularity. I have that number one moniker in Tunisia. I'm aiming for the number one.
You will get there for sure. Yeah, this is definitely one that I follow, and I really get there. Want anyone who's listening to really follow this podcast.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Vice. Really appreciate you hanging out.
Cheers.
Wow, what a great episode that was. We really appreciate you coming and checking it out. We hope that you love open source as much as we do. If you like this video, go ahead and subscribe to us on the YouTube channel. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And of course, tune in to next week's episode. We really appreciate you coming and talking open source with us.